November 2012, Mexico. A man steps off a flight from Montreal, passport in hand, vacation story rehearsed. Jimmy Cournoyer, 33 years old, trying to slip into Mexico like just another Canadian tourist looking for sun. But Mexican immigration officers have different plans. They are waiting. Within hours, he is hooded, shackled, loaded onto a plane bound for Houston, then transferred to Brooklyn, the Metropolitan Detention Center. Concrete walls instead of Cancun beaches. Here is what makes this different. This is not some street dealer getting popped on a corner. This was a man prosecutors call one of the largest marijuana suppliers to New York City. A man who built $1 billion trafficking empire that stretched from British Columbia to Brooklyn, from Montreal to Mexico. A man who worked with the Hells Angels, the Rizzuto crime family, the Bonanno crime family, and cocaine suppliers tied to the Sinaloa cartel. But the real story is not just the scale, it is the method. Jimmy Cournoyer figured out something that changed the game entirely. He found a way to move drugs across the most surveilled border in history without classic laundering, without moving bulk cash internationally. He used one product to buy another, creating a loop so elegant that federal investigators spent years trying to understand it. This is that story. Laval, Quebec, October 1979, a working-class suburb just north of Montreal, the kind of place where hockey dreams are born and modest futures are expected. Jimmy Cournoyer enters the world in a city that straddles two languages, two cultures, and sits perfectly positioned between the American border and the wilderness of British Columbia. His father runs a construction business. Middle class, unremarkable. The kind of family that expects their kids to play by the rules, get decent jobs, and raise families of their own. Nobody is predicting what comes next. By 18, Jimmy is living in an apartment with his brother Joey. Small place, nothing special. But inside that apartment, something is growing, literally. Hydroponic marijuana plants, dozens of them. The first arrest comes fast. 1998, he is caught with those plants and he is sentenced to 2 years probation. Most kids would have learned their lesson. Most kids would have gone straight, found a real job, and forgotten about the quick money. Jimmy was not like most kids. While on probation, he is caught again, this time selling marijuana to a smuggler in Kansatike, the Mohawk community near Oka. Different jurisdiction, different rules, different opportunities. He is already learning the geography of the border. Then Peel Regional Police catch him in a Toronto hotel room. 10,000 ecstasy pills. This is not a kid with some plants anymore. This is distribution. Real weight, real intent. 3-year sentence. Federal time in Canada, and here's where the story turns. Most people go to prison and come out broken. Jimmy Cournoyer went to prison and came out with a business plan. See, prison in the drug world is not just punishment, it is networking. It is graduate school for criminals. You are locked in with people who have been in the game longer than you, who know routes you have never heard of, who have connections you cannot make on the outside. Jimmy absorbed it all. Every conversation, every contact, every lesson about how not to get caught. February 2007, he is out on parole, living in a halfway house, commuting to a day job like any other parolee, trying to reintegrate. But during those subway rides between the halfway house and work, Jimmy is holding meetings, planning sessions with associates, using the Montreal metro system as his mobile office. What emerged from those subway conversations was something nobody had seen before. Not in Quebec, not in Canada, not in the American drug trade. A fully integrated, continent-spanning operation that would eventually move over 100,000 kilograms of marijuana, 83 kilograms of cocaine, and tens of thousands of ecstasy pills through the United States and Canada. The prosecutors would later call it the consortium. Jimmy called it business. The genius of Jimmy Cournoyer's operation wasn't the product. Anyone can grow marijuana. Anyone can buy cocaine. The genius was the loop. It started in British Columbia, outdoor growers, massive operations hidden in the wilderness. Marijuana cultivated at industrial scale. The Hells Angels controlled the bulk transportation, moving tons of product in transport trucks fitted with hidden compartments. Montreal was the staging ground. Jimmy controlled warehouses in and around the city, not just storage facilities. Manufacturing operations, hydroponic marijuana production, ecstasy manufacturing. He was vertically integrated before that term became a Silicon Valley buzzword. But getting drugs from Montreal to American streets, that is where most operations fail. The border between the United States and Canada is 5,500 miles long, most of it wilderness, most of it unwatchable. The parts that matter, the parts with roads and crossings, those are surveilled, patrolled, monitored. Jimmy found the gap. The Akwesasne Mohawk Reservation straddles the border between the United States and Canada. Parts are in Quebec, parts are in Ontario, parts are in New York State. The St. Lawrence River runs through it. And here is the jurisdictional nightmare that made it perfect. American law enforcement cannot operate in Canada. Canadian law enforcement cannot operate in the United States. Tribal police have their own authority, their own priorities. The DEA would later describe it as a border within a border, a seam in the system. And Jimmy Cournoyer threaded that seam like a needle. The logistics were sophisticated. Bulk marijuana shipments would arrive from British Columbia. Jimmy's people would break them down into smaller portions. Then the Akwesasne transportation networks took over. Boats in summer, snowmobiles in winter, hidden compartments in everything. The drugs would cross the St. Lawrence River into the portion of Akwesasne known as Snai, which sits in Quebec but is only accessible by road through the United States. Think about that geography for a second. Canadian territory, only reachable by driving through America. A jurisdictional blind spot that Jimmy exploited for years. From Snai, the marijuana would be loaded into pickup trucks, also fitted with hidden compartments, and transported down to New York City. Stash houses in Queens, Brooklyn, Staten Island, additional locations in Pennsylvania, North Carolina, California. A nationwide distribution network feeding off a single border crossing. The street-level distribution in New York was handled by people tied to the Bonanno crime family. John Venizelos, manager of a mob-owned strip club called Jaguars 3, coordinated the New York end. Federal agents searching his stash houses found heat-sealed marijuana packages alongside a pump-action shotgun and a Glock 23 pistol stolen from a law enforcement officer. But here's where Jimmy's model became truly innovative. Most drug operations face the same problem. What do you do with all that cash? Millions of dollars in small bills. You cannot deposit it. You cannot spend it without attracting attention. Money laundering is expensive, risky, and it leaves trails. Jimmy solved it differently. He did not launder the money, he spent it. The marijuana profits, tens of millions of dollars, were transported from New York to California and Arizona. Private chartered aircraft took off from small airports on Long Island and in New Jersey. The cash was not being washed through shell companies or fake businesses. It was being used to buy Sinaloa cartel cocaine. Mexican cocaine was purchased with American marijuana money, then exported back to Canada for distribution by associates connected to the Rizzuto crime family. The loop was complete. Product went south, cash went west, different product came north. The structure dramatically reduced the need for bulk currency to cross international borders, resulting in enormous profits. The elegance was its simplicity. Use illegal money to buy illegal product. The product became the laundering mechanism itself. The scale was staggering. Single shipments ranged from 330 pounds to 1,100 pounds of marijuana. The crown jewel was one shipment of 5,500 pounds. Street value was in the tens of millions, and this was happening monthly, sometimes weekly. Between 1998 and 2012, Jimmy Cournoyer built something the DEA would later call one of the largest marijuana trafficking organizations ever prosecuted in the United States. But that undersells it. This was not just trafficking, this was infrastructure. It was a system designed to outlast any individual, survive any arrest, and continue indefinitely. But systems require partnerships. Partnerships require trust. And trust in this business is the commodity that always runs out first. The alliance structure Jimmy built was unprecedented for someone his age, his background, his nationality. Think about who he was dealing with. The Hells Angels, Canada's most powerful outlaw motorcycle gang, controlled the transportation of bulk marijuana from British Columbia. Not street-level bikers, but leadership and logistics coordinators who could move tons of product across a continent. The Rizzuto crime family, Montreal's mafia. Vito Rizzuto himself, the boss, appeared on a list of Jimmy's associates that prosecutors filed in court. The Rizzutos handled cocaine distribution in Canada. Their network stretched across Quebec into Ontario, with connections throughout the Italian underworld. The Bonanno family, one of New York's 5 families, provided associates who handled the American distribution end, the strip clubs, the stash houses, and the street-level movement of product through the 5 boroughs. Distribution was their role. And the Sinaloa cartel, one of the most powerful drug trafficking organizations in the Western Hemisphere. It was their cocaine that completed Jimmy's loop. 4 major criminal organizations, 3 countries, 2 products, 1 man coordinating the entire thing. Jimmy would later tell associates he was backed by the Italians. He was not bragging, he was stating fact. The backing was real. The protection was real. The access was real. He had Rizzuto crime family members serving as his drivers, his bodyguards, his enforcers. But here is what made Jimmy different from most drug dealers who reached this level. He did not act like a kingpin. No flashy jewelry, no entourage, no public displays of wealth. He lived like a property manager. He drove nice cars, sure, but nothing that screamed drug money. He dated a Brazilian-born model named Amelia Racine, sister of his right-hand man, Mario Racine. He trained at the same gyms as Georges St. Pierre, the UFC champion. They were friends, sparring partners. The lifestyle was comfortable but camouflaged. He understood something most drug dealers do not. Visibility is vulnerability. Every diamond you wear is an advertisement. Every Lamborghini is a surveillance trigger. Every mansion is a target. Jimmy stayed quiet. He kept his head down and he let the money flow without the noise. But he was not soft. Federal prosecutors would later allege that he established a $2 million hit fund, money set aside to murder or otherwise retaliate against any individuals who cooperated with the government. There were witness tampering charges. The threat was clear: talk to federal agents and there is a price on your head. He was charged with attempting to dissuade co-conspirators from cooperating with law enforcement. The methods were not specified in public filings, but the message reached everyone it needed to reach. Silence or consequences. The balance was precise. Quiet enough to avoid attention, violent enough to maintain control, connected enough to access unlimited product, and sophisticated enough to move it without getting caught. For nearly 15 years, it worked. The DEA investigation that eventually brought down Jimmy Cournoyer didn't start with him. It started in Akwesasne. 3 men, Randolph Square, Kenneth Cree, David Sunday, they controlled the transportation networks that moved marijuana and cash across the St. Lawrence River. The boats, the snowmobiles, the hidden compartments. They were indicted in 2009. While investigating Square, Cree, and Sunday, DEA agents identified something bigger: the Canadian leadership responsible for controlling the flow of narcotics through the Akwesasne networks. Rather than indict that leadership immediately, they made a calculated decision. They would keep watching. They would keep building. It was because of an intriguing new development. The new development was the cocaine loop. The realization that marijuana money was being used to purchase Sinaloa product. That this was not just a trafficking operation. It was a vertically integrated criminal corporation with international partnerships. The methods were comprehensive. Wiretaps on hundreds of phones, physical surveillance on dozens of locations, electronic monitoring of encrypted communications. Jimmy and his associates used BlackBerry devices with encryption. They thought they were secure. They were not. Police in both the US and Canada had found ways to decrypt those communications. Every text message, every phone call, every coordinate shared, every deal discussed, all of it recorded, all of it analyzed, all of it building toward an indictment. Informants were recruited at every level. Some were caught and flipped. Others volunteered information. The pressure was constant. Each arrest created new opportunities. Each defendant faced the same choice: decades in prison or cooperation. The investigation also relied on something Jimmy could not have predicted: a disgruntled girlfriend. Somewhere in his network, a relationship went bad. That ex-girlfriend provided information to the DEA that helped identify Jimmy and his Bonanno associate, John Venizelos. One relationship, one betrayal, the thread that began to unravel everything. By late 2011, the DEA had enough. The evidence was overwhelming. The wiretaps alone could fill courtrooms for months. But Jimmy was not in custody. He was in Canada, untouchable by American arrest warrants. In January 2012, a Brooklyn grand jury returned an indictment. An international arrest warrant was issued. The clock started ticking. Jimmy knew it was coming. He had been in the game too long not to feel the pressure building. Associates were getting arrested. Phones were going quiet. The paranoia that every successful trafficker eventually develops. He made a decision: Mexico. Not to hide randomly, but to reach his partners. He believed that reaching Mexico, closer to cartel-controlled territory, might buy him time or distance from U.S. law enforcement. U.S. law enforcement could track him to the border, but no further. Mexican authorities were not exactly eager to help catch someone protected by the cartels. November 2012, Jimmy booked a flight from Montreal to Cancun. He had a vacation story prepared. A tourist disguise was in place. The plan was simple: land in Mexico, connect with cartel contacts, and vanish into the protection of people who could keep him invisible indefinitely. He never made it past immigration. Mexican authorities were waiting. Whether tipped by U.S. intelligence or flagged by their own systems, they knew who was stepping off that plane. Jimmy was detained immediately. No shots fired, no chase, just handcuffs and a hood and a one-way ticket to you, Justice. The extradition happened fast. Mexico wanted him gone before lawyers could find loopholes. Within days, he was on U.S. soil, Brooklyn Federal Court. The kid from Laval facing a superseding indictment that read like a criminal encyclopedia. The charges were comprehensive: continuing criminal enterprise, conspiracies to manufacture, import, and distribute marijuana, conspiracies to export and distribute cocaine, substantive cocaine distribution, money laundering conspiracy, witness tampering. Each count carried years. Stacked together, they meant life. May 2013, just before trial was set to begin, Jimmy Cournoyer made his final calculation. He entered a guilty plea on 11 counts. No trial, no spectacle, no chance for more witnesses to testify publicly. He admitted to everything: leading the enterprise, the marijuana, the cocaine, the money laundering, all of it. In exchange, the government dropped additional charges. The math seemed favorable. But 11 counts, including continuing criminal enterprise leadership, meant he was never seeing daylight regardless. The guilty plea was entered before Judge Raymond J. Deary. The same judge would eventually pronounce sentence. The same courtroom where Jimmy's empire officially ended. August 20th, 2014, sentencing day, Brooklyn Federal Court. The room was packed with federal agents, prosecutors, and media. Everyone was waiting to see the final chapter. United States Attorney Loretta Lynch did not hold back. His territory was all of North America. His goal was to extend the deadly narcotics trade as far as he could. She described Jimmy as someone who used Native American reservations to violate the security of national borders. Someone who smuggled more than $1 billion worth of deadly narcotics and firearms between the United States, Canada, and Mexico. The statistics were entered into the record. Over 100,000 kilograms of marijuana, 83 kilograms of cocaine, tens of thousands of MDMA pills, hundreds of pounds of additional marijuana seized during the investigation, 60,000 ecstasy pills, multiple firearms and ammunition, more than 800 marijuana plants. Nearly $11 million in narcotics proceeds from multiple locations in New York, California, Pennsylvania, and Kansas. The sentence was 27 years in federal prison, but that was not all. Jimmy agreed to a $1 billion forfeiture money judgment. $1 billion. The figure was largely symbolic, an acknowledgement of the scale of his operation rather than money the government expected to recover. But the government did seize $10 million in actual narcotics proceeds from the investigation. The message from the court was clear. This was not just about Jimmy Cournoyer. This was about deterrence, about showing anyone considering this path what waits at the end of it. DEA Acting Special Agent in Charge, James Hunt, summarized it. This sentence is a message to drug distributors who profit millions while pushing drugs and violence through our country and abroad. Today, law enforcement efforts have led to 27 years in prison for Jimmy Cournoyer, and they mark the end of his drug empire. George St. Pierre, the UFC champion, had written a letter asking the judge for clemency. He said they traveled together, they trained together, they went to restaurants and clubs and had a lot of fun, and that Jimmy is a very loyal friend. St. Pierre later apologized to his fans, calling his signing of the letter a mistake. Loyal friend, that's what Jimmy was to some people. To others, he was a merchant of poison who facilitated the flow of narcotics that destroyed families across a continent. The investigation did not end with Jimmy's sentencing. By the time the case closed, more than 100 defendants had pleaded guilty to narcotics trafficking charges. The entire network dismantled. The acquisition transportation networks exposed. The stash houses in Queens and Brooklyn and Staten Island raided. The California money laundering operation shut down. Alessandro Tallone, the Montreal hair product businessman who laundered Jimmy's cash in California, got 10 years. Prosecutors noted he carried a business card with Vito Rizzuto's phone number. His taste in Ferrari cars was reflected in his tradecraft. Undercover agents arranging a $200,000 transport were told the code word to contact him was Ferrari. The Akwesasne men who ran the border transportation were charged and convicted. The Bonanno associates in New York were prosecuted. The entire pyramid collapsed. But here's the aftermath that matters most. The vacuum Jimmy left behind never got filled. Not by one person, not by one organization. The drug trade fragmented into dozens of smaller operations, each controlling less territory, each moving less product, each attracting less federal attention because none of them reached the scale Jimmy had achieved. He had proven something dangerous, that a relatively unknown Canadian could build an international trafficking empire by being smarter, quieter, and more sophisticated than his competitors. But he had also proven something else, that no matter how smart you are, the system eventually catches up. The wiretaps, the informants, the flipped associates, the disgruntled girlfriend, the encrypted phones that were not encrypted enough. Every tool Jimmy thought protected him eventually betrayed him. Jimmy Cournoyer sits in federal prison today, 45 years old, more than a decade served, more than a decade remaining. He reportedly applied to be transferred to a Canadian penitentiary where parole eligibility comes sooner. That transfer was denied. The cartels he worked with have continued without him. The Sinaloa cartel is still operating. El Chapo is now serving life in an American supermax, but his organization survived. The Rizzuto family has endured despite years of internal warfare and law enforcement pressure. The Hells Angels remain a force in Canadian organized crime. Only Jimmy's piece of the puzzle disappeared entirely. The Akwesasne corridor he exploited remains a concern for law enforcement. The jurisdictional complexities have not changed. The geography has not changed. Other traffickers have tried to use the same routes, but none have achieved Jimmy's scale. None have built his infrastructure. The case study gets taught at DEA training facilities. The model gets analyzed by organized crime researchers. The recordings Jimmy did not know existed get played for new agents learning how to build cases against international traffickers. He became a lesson, a cautionary tale, a demonstration of how logistics, brilliance plus alliance, stacking plus intimidation eventually equals paperwork, wiretaps, flips, forfeiture, and decades in concrete. Let's be clear about what Jimmy Cournoyer represents. not glorification, not celebration. Understanding. Understanding how a kid from a Quebec suburb builds an international drug empire. Understanding how the borders we think are secure have gaps that sophisticated operators exploit. Understanding how criminal organizations cooperate across ethnic and national lines when there is money to be made. The unique elements hit differently when you stack them up. A Canadian who became one of the largest marijuana suppliers to New York City. An operation that moved 100,000 kilos of marijuana, plus cocaine and ecstasy. A model so sophisticated it used one drug's profits to buy another, eliminating the need for traditional money laundering. That's not just crime, that's innovation applied to illegal enterprise. But here's what the aspiring kingpins never understand. The mathematics are simple. In this game, you either die or go to prison. There is no retirement package, no gold watch, no peaceful ending. Jimmy chose prison, 27 years. Others choose bullets. The same ending, different delivery method. The billion-dollar forfeiture judgment, that is not a fine. That is an acknowledgement that the money never really belonged to him. It belonged to a system that was always going to reclaim it. The $11 million actually seized is what the government found. Nobody knows how much they did not find. The streets will always create Jimmy Cournoyers. Different names, different routes, same story. Brilliant minds seeing no future in legitimate work. Strategic thinkers applying themselves to drug distribution instead of legal business. Natural leaders organizing crime instead of communities. The cycle continues because the conditions continue. Jimmy Cournoyer built something unprecedented. A continent-spanning empire with partnerships that crossed every boundary, ethnic, national, organizational. He moved product worth billions. He lived like a king while pretending to be a commoner. He had everything except the one thing that matters, time. From Laval to luxury, from subway meetings to cartel connections, from hydroponic plants in a shared apartment to warehouses full of product across multiple countries. The rise was meteoric. The fall was inevitable. Nobody wins. The game always collects. That is not opinion. That is fact. That is history. That is the only truth the streets ever tell. Remember the name. Forget the glorification. Learn the lesson. Skip the experience. The game has no winners, only survivors serving life.